SI, as expected, the media has decided that we're going to spin this NAFTA deal as a gigantic negative for Canadians. I don't see how this is. I think that lowering, like, in itself, getting rid of supply management is a good thing for Canada. So lowering supply management in exchange to keep the tax or the trade deal with the America is like a win-win for me. To me, the issue here is the insane amount of money that these milk cartels are being awarded for losing part of their unfair deal. But let's take a view on how the Canadian media is going to spin this one.
Really of this new trade deal, and one of the biggest concessions for one of the hearts really of this new trade deal and one of the biggest concessions for Canada is in the dairy industry. Ottawa giving U.S. farmers greater access to the marketplace in Canada. So how does that affect things? Let's get some reaction for you now from David Weens, who's the Vice President of Dairy Farmers of Canada.
Yeah, I'm sure he's not going to be biased at all. He's going to be very straightforward and truthful with us after his company is losing, well, presumably millions. Let's see how that works out. I bet he's going to be very truthful and just super, straight up. That's what I see.
Third-generation farmer. He's the president as well of all of the dairy farmers in Manitoba, and he's been a guest on our program before, so it's good to welcome him back. Mr. Weens, thanks for being with me this morning.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Sir, you went to Washington to make sure, to campaign, to lobby, to make sure that Canada's supply management system was not at risk. It's protected. It is intact under this deal. Why don't we begin in terms of the reaction to that key fact?
Well, we're actually very disappointed that further access
Oh man, we're gonna lose money. We're so disappointed. Yeah, no kidding.
was given. And so that is, we know that it is upwards of 3.5%, which is more than they've done in any other trade agreement. And not only was access given to the Americans, the Americans have negotiated a really good agreement. They have increased access to our market, and at the same time, we are, by the looks of it, not going to be able to export into the U.S. market. So it's very disappointing for dairy farmers across the country, and there'll be a lot of bitter disappointment when they, as they go about doing their morning chores in their barns.
Now, this is, I think, a legitimate complaint. If the U.S. market is going to have more access to Canada, the Canadian market should, should say, if U.S. producers are going to have more access to the Canadian market, the Canadian producers should have more access to the American market. This I see more as a failure of Trudeau and his horrendous choice for negotiator than anything else. I'm pretty sure that someone who actually was able to negotiate and didn't run around wearing cheeky stay calm and negotiate NAFTA t-shirts would have done a much better job with this. If we had a real negotiator, we probably could have gotten a better deal, but we have the idiot Trudeau picked. So I'm going to say, this is a fair complaint, but real leadership probably could have solved this much better. And I really believe, if, maybe I'm wrong here and maybe I'm just being foolish, but I really believe that if we just offered to abolish the system as a whole, maybe they would have taken their tariffs away as a whole. Trump has said that he's been kind of back and forth, but he has said at times that he sees tariffs mainly as a way to get other people or other nations to lower their tariffs. He's also said some stuff that just sounds pretty pro-tariff, so I don't know. We'd have to see on that one. But this is a fair enough complaint. They should have also given Canadian producers more access to the American market, but, I still think that this is a win for Canadian consumers, even if we don't get that. So let's continue. Oops. I muted it.
Realize what's happened.
The number that we have is slicing off 3.6% of the Canadian market, allowing U.S. producers access to 3.6%. That's not as high a figure as some had feared.
It's a high figure, and not only that, with the elimination of the competitive classes, it will actually further shrink our industry. So, what we as dairy farmers are going to be, as farmers realize what has happened here, they're going to wonder about how they are going to move forward. obviously there will be less milk now required for the Canadian marketplace, and that is very disappointing.
What about in terms...
Again, I mean, this, from his perspective, yeah, of course it's disappointing. He's a milk producer. From the perspective of a Canadian citizen who's going to pay less for milk, it's a great thing. So, you know, his whinging does not really bother me. Sorry, bro.
...of action, as you're in touch with your colleagues across the country, certainly in Manitoba...
Yeah, other milk producers who are going to be upset about this.
That was a focal point of concern. In Quebec, though, this has been a huge issue. And the Premier of Quebec, then Premier, now Liberal leader, Philippe Couillard, has talked about going to court if there's any diminution of the status of dairy farmers. What do you think are the next steps then, once the details sort of filter through?
Well, that's it's too early to tell what we're going to. We're just trying to understand exactly what's all been given away here, and it's going to come as a disappointment. And it's unfortunate that when these trade agreements are done, there's always these seeds of resentment that are sown by, you know, by simply sacrificing one industry to get something that's you know, that's really good. So the question becomes, what the Prime Minister needs to explain to Canadian dairy farm families and the other 200,000 people involved in this industry is how this deal is supporting of supply management. That is not at all clear to me, nor will it be clear to other farmers as they realize what's happened here.
So that's interesting because, I mean...
Well, it's clearly not. It's clearly not supporting supply management. It's diminishing it. I guess I can chalk this up as something Trudeau has done that I actually agree with, but I think it's difficult. Again, I don't think this deal was negotiated very well. But yeah, it's clearly not in support of supply management.
The headline touted is, you know, Canada's supply management system has been protected, it remains intact. You're suggesting by opening up the market to this degree, it threatens the entire system itself.
Well, what I've talked about before is death by 1,000 cuts. And so, you know, if the claim here is that they didn't give up on supply management, this is one step along the way that slowly diminishes and weakens our industry, and at some point, you know, to the point of viability. And that, of course, is not clear exactly. We haven't gone through everything here to be able to know that, but dairy farmers are extremely disappointed at how, you know, bit by bit this industry is being given away. And the question becomes for our children and, you know, future generations, like, what is actually going to be left for them? And that's the thing that farmers will be struggling with today.
In terms of your own personal business, again, these are early hours and the details we have not got in their entirety, but third generation farm, as you look at this, what is the absolute impact on what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, my brother and I have made some significant investments this year in improving our facilities, and some of this will call into question because not only you know, did we not, you know, it's a loss in that we will actually be required to produce less milk in the future, and so it'll diminish everything we do, and so that's going to be the question that dairy farmers and all those people that are employed in the industry. It's not just dairy farmers. There's over 200,000 people employed in the industry, and they're all going to be wondering what is next and how.
That's just not even that many. Like, can they not find other jobs? I just don't get it. Like, why should all of Canada pay so that 200,000 people who apparently don't do a very good job because they can't compete with American farmers, why should we all pay for their salaries? No. That doesn't make any sense. If you can't compete, then you can't compete. That's not my fault. It's your fault. Get better. That's all there is to it. If you're afraid about more competition from other milk producers, then, well, you know, it's not my fault. Now, you can say, okay, well, the Americans subsidize their milk market. And again, this should have been part of the deal. If we'd had a real negotiator who had actually been able to do something, as far as I can see, not much was done from her. She didn't actually get us anything. She said, oh, we'll give up this in exchange for continuing NAFTA. It wasn't, we'll give up this in exchange for this. It's like, well, I guess we just have to bend over now since we've done such a terrible job. But yeah, she could have probably negotiated lower subsidies for American milk, or or said that we're not only going to accept milk from unsubsidized farms, that had been completely reasonable. But that's not what she did. That's not what she got. So, yeah, I mean, okay, blame her, but you're still complaining about this system that is unfair and going away. Like, that in itself is not a bad thing. I said that before. I'd been in favor of a complete abolition of supply management in exchange for a good NAFTA deal. That would have been great. But we didn't get that. We got a shitty NAFTA deal compared to what we could have had in exchange for a very small amount of the supply management going away. I mean, 3.6% of the Canadian market. I mean, it's something, but come on, man. Get over it.
How is this going to affect my job, my farm, and that sort of thing?
Maybe I'll have to downsize a little bit. That happens. It's business.
I need to ask Mr. Weens, I mean, I wonder if there's not an element of expectation here. You heard so many times over this last year plus Donald Trump talk about dairy, how much it was an irritant for him, a real bee in his bonnet. Surely you can't be surprised that Canada had to make concessions in this area.
Well, for Mr. Trump, it's been a major win, but we very clearly took the Prime Minister at his words that he would. Yeah.
Well, that was your mistake, my dude. Trusting Trudeau whenever he says anything is basically a mistake. So I don't know who to blame on that one other than you.
He was actually in support of supply management, and so I'm at a bit of a loss to understand how this supports supply management, and I think the Prime Minister needs to clearly explain to the dairy farm families and all the families that are involved in the dairy sector exactly how does this support supply management. I fail to see that.
Mr. Weens, very good to have your perspective on this. We'll be speaking, I know, with you.
So what did this guy want? Did he want Canada to just like say no to NAFTA and have no free trade agreement just so that they could save supply management? Is that his ideal world here then? Like, because that would have been the trade, right? If we don't lose any of supply management, there's no NAFTA deal, and tariffs on a whole bunch of other things are going to go up. Then again, he's a dairy producer, so he doesn't give a fuck. This is the problem with interviewing a dairy producer when you're talking about supply management. Of course they're in favor of it. How could they not be? It's good for them. If you're used to this thing, this pseudo-socialist thing, being good for you, and then it's taken away, of course you're sad about it. This is a huge issue with mixed economies. Once you've given someone something, they feel entitled to it. You can't give someone subsidies or protect their or give them supply management and then take it away and expect them to not care. Of course they'll care. They're used to it. This guy's used to having the government be on his side. So now that it's not on his side or less on his side, of course he's upset. He's only responding to his own incentives. So, yeah, I don't specifically blame him for acting this way. I do think that the idea in general that he should be complaining is a little bit silly, but again, I understand. He's used to having it, and he was promised that he would have it. The real solution in the long run is to not subsidize anyone, not have any supply management in any industry, and then this won't have to happen. People will just compete, and if they can't compete, they'll go away. And that will be that. He's used to playing by unfair rules, and now that the unfair rules are disappearing, he's upset. That's how it goes, my dude. I don't actually know what's after this. Let's find out.
As this filters through, the dairy industry has been struck in this deal, many of them fearing direct harm to their business. With the market opening up, we understand the figure 3.6%. Claude Rivet spoke to some of the farmers about their concerns just ahead of the deals being announced.
Angus McKinnon has spent his life working on the family farm. The McKinnon Dairy Farm near Quaticook has been operated by the family since 1845. Canada's supply management system has been good for business, but McKinnon is afraid.
No kidding! It's been good for the people who have an unfair deal. Wow!
That could all change.
We have been able to adjust slightly between the TPP concessions made and European concessions made, but every time it chips away at the block. Pretty soon there won't be any block left.
McKinnon fears any change would open the floodgates and endanger Canadian family farms.
Canada is not going to become a dumping ground for U.S. overproduction. And that has been a constant reminder that we've said to Mr. Trudeau in the past few months. We are responsible for our milk production. The U.S. has to become responsible for their milk production too.
In the nearby town of Cleveland, Quebec, you'll find Timothy Keenan and his son Devin tending to the cows. The Keenans have also been farming in the eastern townships of Quebec since the 1840s. No need to look very high up the Keenan family tree to find a picture of life before the current system.
When my grandfather was farming, he farmed and it was just to break even. And my grandmother had to go to work and to be a nurse, and that was what really fed the family. And now in my parents' generation, they can work together on this farm and be able to support themselves and all.
At the cost of every Canadian individual who has to pay increased prices for milk. Like, again, interviewing this kid, it sucks for him, no doubt, but to say that because it's bad for him, it's good for Canada or bad for Canada is silly. I don't know why I know why they're interviewing these people. It's because they can put a face to the perceived loss. It's hard to go and talk to someone who's a low-income family and say, is it going to be a big deal for you that now a jug of milk costs 50 cents less every time you have to buy it? They're going to be like, well, I mean, over the long run, it's like some money every year, so that's nice. There's not as much emotion there. But for these people, they have their livelihood built on something that is not very good for Canada as a whole, and so when you take it away from them, they feel very betrayed, and you can put that on the news. It's easier to show someone who's very emotional and get a good story than it is to show someone who's not. That's why they're interviewing the milk farmers instead of the people who are being benefited by this, which would, of course, be low-income families. So, I feel bad for them as individuals, but I don't feel bad for them as a block, I suppose. I don't feel bad for dairy farmers in general because, well, this is just them having to compete again. I've said it already, the American subsidies for milk are an issue, but I don't think loosening supply management by 3.6% is going to completely destroy dairy farmers simply because of unfair American practices. Hopefully, when we have a new prime minister, oh my God, hopefully it's this election, but when we do have a new prime minister eventually, someone who can actually make some trade deals, maybe they'll do a better job and they'll be able to get rid of some of the American subsidies, or maybe they'll make a good argument and say, hey, well, look, we did not have this supply management thing if you were playing fairly. Maybe that will happen, but that's not going to happen yet, and as far as the average Canadian is concerned, supply management is a net negative.
Also our own family.
The Keenans are obviously concerned with their own family's livelihood, but it's not just that. Tim Keenan has been following what happened to countries that have scrapped supply management, and he doesn't like what he's seeing.
In Europe, they've ended up, many farms have gone out of business, and the European community has put a great deal of money, billions of dollars, to support those farmers.
Keenan recognizes the Canadian system isn't perfect, but he points out it's one that has made unsubsidized dairy farming a reality, something the United States have yet to achieve. CBC News, Sherbrooke.
So, there is the view on the farm, and now we know, of course, the concession Canada making, opening up 3.6% of its market. This is a $200 billion industry, and we are getting reaction already from dairy producers. Michael Serapio taking a look, first of all, in detail, as we've been mentioning all morning. We knew this was going to be sort of the central sticking point because Donald Trump has referenced it constantly over the last year plus. What are the terms struck?
The term struck really, Heather, it begins with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because essentially what Canada has done here is loosely structured on the concessions it made on dairy regarding the TPP. Now, under that deal, the 10 Pacific Rim countries got market access to this country that equals 3.25% of Canada's milk production. Now, you quoted the number 3.6. We're waiting for the exact details around that, but that is basically based on the fact that we know that the U.S. is going to get what's described as a marginally higher percentage than that was given to the TPP. And perhaps more importantly for U.S. negotiators, Canada in this deal is actually agreeing to end what's called Class 7 pricing. Now that slashed the price of certain milk-produced ingredients such as protein concentrate, skim, and whole milk powder, all of which is used in making cheese and yogurt. And those slashed prices disadvantage similar products made in the United States. So, and among them, the products made in Wisconsin, remembering that it was a visit to Wisconsin that put dairy into Donald Trump's sight line. So concessions on the whole industry on that, but what was preserved here was supply management in whole, because what the United States really wanted to do was have Canada abandon supply management. That is not what is happening here, but some concessions.
No mention as to what Americans were willing to give up in exchange for the abandonment of supply management. They may have been willing to give up some subsidies for milk. They may have been willing to, I don't know, take away their own tariffs against Canadian dairy. I don't know what they were going to do. But yeah, in a whole, they're just not going to mention that. I guess we'll watch the rest of this. There's only 3 minutes left, but I doubt that there's much left to comment on. We'll see.
Which, as we now know, is not being greeted very enthusiastically by farmers in this country.
No, it's interesting, and even though you say to farmers, because I've spoken to a couple this morning, Michael, that, at least supply management in the main is intact. They say it's death by 1,000 cuts if you open up the market again, another 3.6%, and on it goes. Tell us more about how they've been reacting.
Well, you're right, and when they talk about 1,000 cuts, they're not just talking about this renegotiated NAFTA, now the USMCA. They're also talking about concessions made to the TPP, concessions made to CETA, and to that, I want to bring in a farmer from Caledon, Ontario, because on the ground, there is a lot of concern of what's going to happen to their bottom line. Take a listen.
I've got a knot in the pit of my stomach. I'm not sure where we're going with this. It's kind of one of the worst, probably one of the worst case scenarios. It could have been worse, but this is one of the worst case scenarios. Giving up almost 3.6% of our market again to another trade deal is frustrating. That decreases our future growth in our industry. In Canada, we're trying to promote different products, grow the market, everything like that. And by giving it away, you've given it away to foreign countries who've done nothing to help try to grow the market.
And you were mentioning the valuation of dairy in whole, Heather. Take a look at the big board that we put here, because in terms of the jobs that are reliant on the dairy industry in this country, 220.
Okay, this is actually worth talking about. So there's a 3.6 change in, or 3.6, presumably 3.6% of this 20 billion is going to go away. So that's what? 2 billion-ish? So they're going to be paid 5 billion for their 2 billion loss? What the fuck are you complaining about? I don't understand. The Trudeau government already said they're going to subsidize them for this. They already said they're giving them the money back. It's frustrating. It's frustrating because you've got people who are used to taking public money. They start complaining when you're not going to be able to take as much public money anymore. And so what does the government do? Oh, they're just going to give them some public money to shut them up.
20,000 worth some $20 billion in the numbers that you've been reporting all day. But that does underline how important this industry is. And certainly in provinces like Ontario, and particularly in Quebec, which today is going to vote, as dairy farmers and that industry can influence a lot of the riding results in Quebec as the election and Quebecers go to vote today.
Michael, we're going to be ongoing reaction to all of this.
Well, I'm done with this one. Yeah, it seems like a bunch of people whining because they don't get to have an unfair system anymore. Or as unfair a system to Canadian consumers. It's pretty silly. I think they do have one legitimate argument, and that is American subsidies for milk should stop. But again, I mean, it's like one socialist-esque country complaining about the other socialist-esque country. Like, if we were in a situation where these governments just weren't doing these things, then what would you be complaining about? There's too much free trade, it's terrible, competing is awful, I don't want to have to do that. I don't know, man. The overall area that we're in is, or the issues that we're having are directly because of government control over these things. So lessening government control over these things, to me, is a step in the right direction. Yeah, it's going to hurt some people in the short run, I understand, but in the long run, this is making Canadian dairy more competitive, and I'm in favor of that. So if you have a different opinion, please let me know. I'll answer your comment. If not, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.